Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis podcast. I'm Steve Smith, episode 142. Today we're going to Boston. Call up Steve Baccari, highly educated individual, has a MBA in finance, master's in accounting, bachelor's in marketing. Grew up playing multiple sports. Didn't start till late. Started last year in high school, senior year. It's interesting. We'll get into how we met. And he was sent to train with us. He sent me quite a few notes on making connections, trying to have a recap. He's listened to all the podcasts. And the theme would be on how to grow the game. He primarily teaches adult beginners and intermediates. He works full-time away from tennis. He works at a college, works in the accounting department. I think sometimes the person who's furthest away sees the most. But it'd be very good to get his perspective and try to put some things together. So let me give him a shout and we'll get started. Going to Boston Bruins. I'll have to ask him if he's following the hockey. Ring one.
Hi, Steve.
Steve, thank you for being a guest on the GreatBase Tennis podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, let's talk tennis. First, let's talk about your background. Tell us, you started in Boston. You're married, father of two, but let's go through your youth first.
Boston suburbs guy. I grew up in Waltham, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. I was all the way through college. I went to Bentley University in Waltham as well. But I grew up playing, I was, pretty much any backyard sport you could. Mostly played baseball, basketball, and soccer really young, stuck with the baseball and basketball into high school. And then discovered tennis senior year of high school, actually. They were going to cut the program at our high school. We didn't have enough returning players and new players coming in. And they kind of put up the announcement over the loudspeaker, tennis tryouts are on. And then 2 days later, it was, tennis tryouts are still on if anyone would like to come out. Myself and three of my friends decided to just go and check it out and try it out. And of the four of us, I was definitely the one that fell in love.
And with that, you went to Northeastern as well, right?
I did a graduate school program there. Bentley, I was there for marketing, and then Northeastern, a little bit of career change for accounting and a master's in finance. So I have a master's of science in accounting and an MBA in finance.
Wow, how's it go with accounting? Perfection is the minimal standard.
Yeah. As long as no money is leaving the door that shouldn't, that's what my bosses care about.
Accounting, that's for many college students, that's the make it or break it class to get into the business school. The Northeast program was really cool. It was you couldn't actually have taken more than, I believe, 2 or 3 accounting courses. It was for people specifically changing majors. So everyone went in fresh. So I had no real background going through the accounting courses, and it was intense. It was a full-time program, 15 months for the dual degree. But it was good. It was it got you prepared and out into the public accounting world. Now I work for Mass Bay Community College in the comptroller for that school. Northeastern was always known for being a co-op. So the undergrads would, I think it was a 5-year program. They would work for one. Is that right?
Usually you would, so 5 years to complete, and usually students would have 2 to 3, I believe they call them externships or the co-op program, where they would be working in different fields. So, and I want to say it's as early as like second semester freshman or first semester sophomores that they're already, taking on these, internship type roles. The program that I went through, 15 months total, but 3 months of it were an actual internship at one of the accounting firms, and it was paid. So, it was kind of like a discount on the tuition a little bit when you get paid for 3 months of the 15.
with accounting, make it or break it. Coming back to that, on these podcasts, I've talked about running this academic program where you could get a 2-year degree. It was occupational competency as a tennis teaching pro manager. We finally had one professor who, it was great. You know, he would, okay, yeah, this is your pro shop and this is your lesson inventory. And he made it a tennis business. And he had more success getting the students through that program. The first one was preliminary. In other words, it wasn't transferable. But I was just told over and over again that the students had to just stay up with it, do the work every day. You couldn't get behind.
Yeah, true of just about every profession. You don't really know anything until you get on the job. I mean, all the learning happens on the job. So anytime there's programs collegiately where you can be on the job, it's very helpful for a student walking out the door.
Well, I think it's interesting that you work part-time in tennis. I said before I called that many times the person who's the furthest away sees the most. I'm from a family of 6, and I would say I left the nest at the youngest age and I went the furthest away. And I do say that sometimes with siblings, of course it's an opinion, is that the person who's furthest away sees the most when you're sometimes considered an outsider looking in. Tell us about how you got started in tennis teaching.
So I had taken recreation lessons in the nearby town, and it was run by Gordon Graham, who you mentioned on the podcast multiple times, the former women's Harvard tennis coach. I was taking the lessons, and the competition was a little bit light, and I just approached the instructor at the time about, how do you get into teaching? And he was the one who referred me to Gordon directly. Gordon was fantastic. I owe him so much for sort of laying out a path rather than just dismissing the idea. And Gordon asked me to essentially go through a PTR course or USPTA, and then to do an online course for GreatBase, and then to actually meet and work with yourself and GreatBase. And I want to say I talked with him in December, and teaching started in April. So I called you up. You were based out of Memphis at the time, so I flew down to Memphis sometime in March. Went through the online programs, did the PTR, youth coaching, and then worked with Gordon for a week during the New England spring break time, so the April vacation. And it was a whirlwind. It was very difficult to go down, meet with you, do the film analysis, realize the issues, and then pretty much no time between March and April to make substantial changes before you start coaching. So I got really good at the demonstrations. I got really good at going slow and the mirror work. So that if a student asked, I could say, no, this is how it should look. Because I knew playing wise, I wasn't going to be ready. But I've been doing it since 2018. So about 5 years now, working for a couple different towns and cities, running their rec programs for adults and juniors.
No, for our listeners, when we train coaches, the number one thing, even if someone is no longer playing, we want to just film them hitting the ball. We can just toss forehands and backhands to them, the essential shots. And just like starting a regular student, as long as they're not a complete beginner, we recommend filming. And I don't think there's any substitute for that.
Without a doubt. I mean, people honestly just don't see their own idiosyncrasies, myself included. You really have to put it to an image. You have to show the people exactly what they're doing versus, a demonstration of what you'd like to be doing. And I mean, I was only at your facility for 3 days, and I laughed. It was I think it was Nate Huggett and Ilya. I was happy to hear him on the podcast a few weeks ago. But Ilya, a saint. I mean, very serious and demanding, but patience, which is really what I needed. Because trying to make technical changes over the course of a weekend, I was so focused on the movement that I looked like the most unathletic person in the world. I think I even got him to crack a smile or two when I would completely miss the ball. But no, it was so helpful. And then to have that video to reference, and then to do my own videos every now and again, just to check in on it. It's extremely helpful.
No, Ilya was his name came up just yesterday or 2 days ago. I was at an ITF junior. I was watching someone that I've worked with for about the same amount of time. I worked with Ilya 5 years, and we were based in Orlando for close to three, and Ilya is still there. And I told the father and the son, I said, I just don't understand why you're still not working with him, even if it's just once a week, and putting the camera on the fence and having him watch you play. I do think a lot of times juniors will make the decision where they can put the shoulder bag on the shoulder and go to a junior program where happy, busy, good. They look like they're training like pros. But it's amazing how people can, in tennis, not use what I have in your notes here. You called it a online education resource. You have an acronym for it in your notes here.
Yeah, the OER, Open Educational Resource.
Open Education Resource. And we'll get into that because I think really people should be able to greatly reduce their costs. Going back to Gordon Graham, that's a story in group dynamics. And in your notes, actually, I did mention this upon introducing you, that you've listened to all the podcasts and you've mentioned so many in your notes, one with Richard Hernandez coming on the second time and talking about the economics of tennis and using group dynamics to lower the costs. You're teaching large groups if you have to wear a whistle to work. And currently I'm not wearing a whistle, but so Gordon came in. I remember like it was yesterday, he was recruiting a gal that we trained, Liberty Secchi, and she didn't go to Harvard, but she had the opportunity. She ended up going to Vanderbilt. But I didn't know it at the time, but I was just sitting on the bleachers and had all the coaches. They say, come on over here, we'll just ask Gordon questions. And I would just blow the whistle, and I would yell something out, and all the courses would change. All the drill would change. And he was taking that all in, real quiet guy, humble. And then he spoke to his partner, Dave Fish, who was the men's coach. And then Dave was bringing his team down shortly afterwards. And I'll never forget, story of circumstances. This was so long ago, I didn't have a cell phone. I was borrowing one of my son's cell phone. I was anti-cell phone. So the phone rings, and it's Jeremy Wertzman. And he was playing pro tennis at the time and just got out of school. And he just said, how do you know Jeremy? And I said, no, he's one of our students. And he said something like he's the best ball striker in college tennis. And then with what happened with Harvard is they sent Cheyenne Hawk, who came for a very short period of time, but then he called up and he made some arrangements and he ended up staying for over 2 weeks. And then he came back a second time because he just felt like there was so much to study. He was the director of the Harvard tennis camp. But that's where, I appreciate Gordon, telling you that you had to go through the PTR, so you had liability insurance, and then do all the online, and then to come in person. What would you say about studying in person versus online? I hear a lot of people say there's really no substitute to being there, bricks and mortar, being there in person.
Yeah. My online introduction to GreatBase was also before sort of Andy and Leo kind of took over for some of the things, and they did a really good job of clarifying a lot of points. But there were certain things that I'm learning online, and I'm listening to it, and I didn't quite understand sort of the grips and how to position. And then Nate, who was I think he was interning for you, or he might even be working. When he put the grip sticker, on my racket, it became clear as day. There was no question about it. I think in my video you can see me. I'm kind of like lifting a little bit at the end of my volleys. And I had just totally misinterpreted something that I had heard on the video. And once I saw it and you and I had spoken and we're going through the review, it was like, oh, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. So the in-person, the online is a resource without a doubt, but I needed that in-person meeting. I needed to work with someone. I needed the hands-on interaction to sort of get my game where it needs to be.
Nathan, great guy. He did do an internship with us, and then he went to St. Leo. He had graduated from Ferris State with a degree in professional tennis management. Chad Barrell, his team just recently won a national title. I believe they were the champions on the men's side and the finalists on the women's side. But he went there for 2 years, got a master's, and My update on him is that he's in Colorado teaching tennis, but what a great teddy bear. I think his forte would be teaching young kids how to play.
Yeah. You definitely had. I would say Ilya was the straight-faced one, and Nate was the one. I won't do it on this podcast, but when I was getting frustrated, I was swearing a little bit, and I had to keep apologizing to Nate. I didn't feel like I had to apologize to kids. I had to apologize to Nathan. It was. You could tell he was a bit of that teddy bear.
Yeah, you actually mentioned Andy. I communicated with him just yesterday. One thing, Andy and Leo, they just helped out tremendously. Andy really tired of answering the same question. Like how many times can you answer the same question on the follow through? People are so, it's really, the young guy on our podcast said it so well where people get stuck on the forehand when they look at the content we're sharing. They just get so stuck with, so obviously 3 different degrees. So that's certainly, that type of mindset has an influence on. So you're a student, so you got into tennis. You felt like there was more. You had to actually study, which is very, very good. A lot of times in tennis, there is no study. It's just wing it.
Yeah. Again, credit to Gordon on that, because I probably would have. I would have looked to some sort of education or some sort of programming, but it would not have been this technical base. And that's, I loved physics in high school and college, and it's like a horrible thing to say. But when I was introduced to GreatBase, it just made so much sense. Everything about it made sense. That's how my mind works. Biology, chemistry. It doesn't make sense. I don't know how a radio wave works. But when it came to the physics side of the house and how to apply forces and spins and things like that, that was exactly what I needed.
Physics. I remember getting an A in physics, and my father was a civil engineer. He looked at that, said, "You got an A in physics." And I do think young boys will tell their mothers everything, but I didn't tell him at the time, and I did years later. But I said, I had the test before. As a member of the hockey team, I had the test before I took it. I think that's those type of experiences are one of the reasons I said, well, I want to study something that I really want to study. I do think a lot of times young people just trying to get the grade and are looking out the window and want to go kick a ball, throw a ball.
Yeah, no, it was a high school teacher was actually, so our good friend of mine, it was her father, who is the physics teacher and guidance counselor and golf coach. And he had a thick Irish accent, Irish brogue. And it was all of us in the class together, all friends under him. I don't know how I got an A, because it was the most social, but it was, he got the start. He got the love of it going. So physics was definitely my science.
Yeah, physics is not a fad. That's where Braden, it's physics, it's not philosophy, not psychology, it's physics first. So many Braden lines. Do you want to have your serve be a pea shooter or a bazooka gun? Let's talk about the PTR, but before we do that, family, I've got down here 4 and 2. Are you starting to teach in the basement, the garage? You're trying to get your little kids hitting balls?
Yeah, well, we're trying to get the throw motion going. T-ball starts next week. We've got soccer and that sort of thing. The youngest just started soccer this year, 2 years old. That's comical to watch. But it's all in good fun right now. It's more about, whatever they want to play, let's just go play and see if we can't just reinforce some good behaviors in terms of how to throw and how to catch and how to move. Nothing too serious yet.
Little kid sports. I saw a clip. Someone sent it to me the other day. It was 6-year-olds playing softball, t-ball, I should say. And young girl hits the ball. It goes like 5 feet from home plate. And everybody on the other team, everybody ran to the ball. So she runs down the first baseline and she does a cartwheel on her way to first base. So that was kind of cool. But I guess baseball and soccer, I always think of soccer, only 2 people know where to be, the goalies, and the other 20 people is just a cluster around the ball. But no, it's so important to start just becoming athletes. But I think actually young kids, beginners, really, they don't even need a tennis court to learn stroke mechanics.
No, yeah, the throwing motion is a big thing with baseball right now. I can just get a somewhat semblance of a throwing motion that will work later in life, that would be good. Just avoid the injuries and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can go out get a plastic racket, those light plastic rackets, and miniature size, and then you get the where you can blow bubbles. So, not sure what that's called. I guess it's a gadget where you blow bubbles and the bubbles are floating, and you have the young kid. They have to put the racket on their head, palm down, and then just twist to knock the bubble out of the sky. And the bubbles are all floating up, so has a little bit of the Roscoe Tanner reaching up to the lowest, reaching up to the branch where the highest point of his reach on the serve.
Okay, yeah, the bubbles are a mainstay right now in the household. That would work.
Yeah, little kids go out to a lake and they're throwing pebbles in the water, and they take their hand, and they say their right hand and put the right hand on their head, right hand on their shoulder, just anything not to have them go palm up.
Right. Yeah, because that was my own personal problem. I've been a palm up thrower my entire life, so I had to make that change. I thankfully don't throw a football palm up, not Philip Rivers style. But that was helpful, is that word picture method or reference to football throwing was very different to how I threw a baseball. So once I realized that, the serve came a lot easier.
Casey Curtis, who we had as a guest on the podcast, I was talking to him the other day, and he was saying, no, it's like throwing a baseball, not like throwing a football. I think really the point is you just got to learn to throw with, but with a football, I mean, people don't go palm up. You wouldn't be able to throw it. But even like yourself, you grew up playing baseball. People played quite a bit of baseball when they first pick up a racket. They go palm up because they see their target down and through the net. And it's just logical, intelligent to think, okay, I've got to go pizza position, pull down, get the serve in.
Right. Yeah. I play middle infield, usually second base, and so many of the throws from second base are sidearm, sideways. Playing shortstop and pitching is a little bit different in terms of mechanics than trying to get the ball from the opposite side of the field. Always more difficult.
Before we get into the report you sent me, trying to grow the game and some really important points that you put together, I want to touch upon. Let's go through. You just went to a PTR weekend. How was that?
It was really good. There's a pre-course that's like 7 or 8 hours, and there was 2 days on site that amounted to about 14 or 15 hours. And then there's they make you get CPR certified, go through the Coach Youth Tennis program, and they do the USTA Safe Play certifications. All of those certifications are extremely important. Some of the Safe Play information and statistics they're terrible. It's just so shocking how many issues there are out there, and it's sad. But it was eye-opening to me, and things to watch out for. That type of thing is way more important than I really ever suspected. And then the CPR certification, obviously great for everything in life. And then you get into the education of the tennis, and it was good. I having had a GreatBase background, there were definitely things that I don't say are confusing, but things that I maybe disagree with a little bit. Some things that felt contradictory based on what they were teaching versus what they were showing, just based on, again, what I knew. But overall, I left that program feeling like I'm a better coach. They had a lot of good things for structure of lessons, and Dennis Vandermeer is sort of alive and well in the GreatBase. There's the progressions and the technical corrections. A lot of that stuff, I was looking at the videos of it or watching them do it live, and I'm saying, oh, I saw that on the GreatBase website. That's a Vandermeer progression, or that's a Vandermeer correction. We had one where on the serve, they had you turn your knuckles out, and so you're hitting on the opposite side of the racket, making contact to work on sort of palm down. And, things like that I kept recognizing it. I was like, oh, that's what that is. That's this piece of it. At the beginning of the session, they asked what we'd like to learn. I wrote down group dynamics, and the first thing they talk about is how Vandermeer used to memorize everyone's name instantly and then be able to associate their name with sort of a technical correction that they needed. What was inefficient with their game. So it was good. I was happy to see that. I didn't feel like it was different from what I was expecting. The PTR recently restructured their program, so I was in just a level 1 certification, but they put in an assistant coach program, a level 1, level 2, and level 3, along with some specialty workshops and a women's-based PTRW. And so the session I was in was for, working under like recreation staff, part-time, young professional, could be high school coaches, stuff like that. And the next one is more for full-time coaches. And then the last one is more about developing juniors who are trying to play in college and beyond, that sort of deal. So it was good. Yeah, overall, really great.
When you first started with Gordon Graham, tell us again, that was the recreational level?
Yeah, so before they had this shakeup of level 1, 2, 3s, yeah, there was a recreation coach program, and I had completed that back in the day, and it had a coach youth tennis component and recreational coach certificate. Yeah, so I did that back in 2018, and then I recently completed the level 1, but that's the new format, the PTR.
Yeah, I go way back with the PTR. First met Dennis, I'm going to guess 1976. I've been a member, I think, since 78. But anyway, so many positives. You can say one thing, and it just makes me think of when you say the serve, wrong side, right side. If you make that a drill, at first have them just hit on the wrong side of the racket. So it always instead of going palm up, you just go knuckles up. So knuckles to the ball. And then,
right.
I've always said with someone like Dennis, some of these masterminds, Vic Braden, is once you study their information, then if you go to work, I feel like you can learn more when you get out there and you're just teaching what they've taught you. A lab setting. In other words, okay, I'm going to study this content and then go practice it. I think sometimes what people do is they don't practice what they're taught. So it's that old line, if you don't use the skill, you lose the skill. But I think there's an art in everything in doing that drill. You just get kids going wrong side, right side, and just have them to go slow, wrong side, right side. So then you can teach rhythm within that. And recently I had someone do that with a young player, and he said, that's magic. It's just magic. Because it's not. Braden used to say that if you can get someone in one lesson to go from palm up to palm down, he goes, then you can teach tennis. What'll happen is you can get the person to do it during the lesson, but when they leave, they're going to lose it. That gear shift mentality. You got to do it over and over again before it becomes second nature, instinctive. But one other thing too, just to echo that and to reinforce it, it's important for coaches to go through safe training. It is absolutely disturbing when with the problems that young people face, being protected in society. It's crazy.
Yeah. I really just didn't realize the statistics out there. That was tough. But it was good to know. It's good to, so your eyes are open, your ears are listening, in case there are issues. It does just make you aware.
Do they encourage you to take all 5? Or is that your choice? You have to do it in order? There's 5 certifications, correct?
No, I think it's really for what the coaches are looking for. If you're looking to be a full-time coach, say like in a facility, you should probably be in a level 2. If you're looking to have sort of a junior development program where you're bringing, where you're trying to travel and you're bringing you're bringing your coaching, to more of a collegiate or higher level, then you should be in the level 3. So there's definitely a step progression there, but I don't think that they expect you to go from level 1 to level 3 and everything in between. I think the idea is figure out what level you would like to be teaching at and then complete the course from there.
No, I tell people entering the game in this country they should become a member of the PTR, and ideally you become a member of both. It just really depends on one's timetable. What did it cost to go through this?
That's a good question. I want to say it was like, let's say it was under $500 all in, and that would include the CPR course. I think it was $157 for the PTR workshop itself, and then joining was between $200 and $300, but includes the insurance as well. So I want to say under $500 to join the PTR, complete your CPR certification, and complete the level 1 certificate.
Just to get my initials correct, you're saying CPR, not PTR.
Yes, CPR. Yeah, they require a CPR training as well. Yep.
Wow, that's interesting. That used to be mandatory. Mandatory.
It is. Oh, yeah, it is. It is mandatory. Yeah.
No, I mean, I would say in the 70s and 80s, not only for certification, but every year a facility, if you ran tennis courts, your staff had to go through CPR every year.
Yeah. I think their expectation was we're not sending you out there saying you're PTR without this knowledge on hand, regardless of what facility you go to.
No, my career, long one, I've only seen CPR on a tennis court administered twice, and both times the person was successful. In other words, the patient lived.
That stuff scares me for sure. I've had some issues in the baseball world, and it's no fun. No fun having an ambulance show up.
Steve, tell us about the pre-course. So was that all video work, or was it some written work? Things
all
that you
video.
had to read?
Yeah. There was a little bit of reading, but it was mostly based on the video. So the pre-work was pretty. There was additional things taught from what they taught in the in-person workshop, but a lot of it, was reiterated in person. The things that they didn't really go over in person that was heavily featured in the pre-course work was talking about sort of the physical and mental development of the different age groups, and then various training for those age groups that's age appropriate. But there's a technical aspect to it. They go over their sort of progressions. They have that instant tennis program, which I think you've mentioned before, or talked about.
Yeah.
They go through various hours worth of technical correction. So if you see this, here's your Vandermeer trick, essentially. Here's your trick to get it to go right. They do go through, forehands, backhands, forehand, backhand volley, serve and overhead. They didn't teach the return of serve, but the class was really geared towards beginners. So the logic was you're not going to get a beginner that's going to require a proper return of serve. You'll be able to take a full ground stroke. And then they broke down each shot into components. So they had grip, a load, stance, shape of the swing, a point of contact, and a follow through. And then the toss was in there for the serve as well. So it was good. The pre-work, all of those things for the most part were featured again in person. But the idea of the physical development of, say, a 6 to 10-year-old, and then a 10 to 12-year-old, and then a 12 to 17-year-old, it was broken down, something along those lines.
How many people were in the class?
9 people were in the class.
9. It comes back to the number. Dennis, I think I would say it was waitlisted before at 36. And what he would do, you mentioned it, he would teach the serve. And his longtime assistant, Louis Cap, Dennis would never look back, and he would have all 36 names. He would remember the order of the serve. In other words, did Joe serve first or did Joe serve second? And they would never stop the tape, and then he would say what their flaw was and what their correction was. So everybody hit like 6 serves, and he just went, this is Joe. Number 1 flaw is his toss is too high. and this always benefited if you toss low. It was, such a showman, and I would say that he had everybody right in the palm of his hands once he went through that. Who was the instructor, or there were more than one?
So it was an interesting group because we had one person who was co-facilitating his first one, and so then there was a regional director, Carol. I'll get her last name, Carol Waite, I want to say, and Gavin Glider. So it was 3 people to 9, which they said that was very unusual, but it was kind of nice because you got a little bit more of a hands-on experience. It was easier to take someone aside and ask a question here or there as opposed to having, one person for the whole group.
So it was held at a tennis club?
It was held at a tennis club, yeah, the Sportsman Tennis Club in Dorchester, Mass.
I was told this a long time ago, when you have a wheelchair clinic, if you just have 1 or 2 people sign up, it's fantastic. So, yeah, it's good to know that people are becoming certified because so many people are not certified. I just think for myself, I continue to pay my PTR and USPTA dues, and I'm not proactive at all with either organization. But I just think it's loyalty. I just think that it's not that much money, and if you're making your living, especially full time, I think also too, if you want to have a voice, if you want to be critical of the PTR or USPTA, I ask right away when someone's critical, like, "Are you a member?" And they say no, and they say, "How would you know? How would you know?" I think you have to take the course before you can criticize the course.
Yeah, I've heard you mention the podcast in the past. Sending your students along, I think you caution them saying, you're going to know more than the instructor does. And there is a little bit of that, sit down, shut your mouth, listen to what they have to say, get your certification. There's things to be learned, but not everything has to be a disagreement in the moment. They're there trying to teach. They're teaching their very specific program. That's what you signed up for. Again, I don't agree with everything that they were talking about, but I was respectful of it. You're there to learn their methods in that moment, and it's good to supplement my game, or my coaching, not necessarily replace things that I know are true.
No, Steve, there's far more similarities than there are differences. If you just took, Braden and Vandermeer, way more similarities. I think that in the application, I think you have to often think or stop and think when group dynamics. For me, I used to love to teach PE classes. There was no ego. They just wanted the credit. They came out. They're not uptight about who's in their group and who they're going to hit with, and no parents are watching and climbing the fence. And you can just have some fun with it. But no, I think the idea that you can be smarter than a test is that, I think especially to an experience level, if people study what we've put together, you can take Vandermeer progressions with Braden information. For example, Dennis years ago, he didn't teach the close the racket face. And this was long before the semi-Western grip became, before it became acceptable. It used to be like that was taboo. Even though there's great players from every era that have had extreme grips, but racket on edge, penny on edge, it was really a 180-degree swing. So that's where Braden, he brought more science into it. But it is a science. It is an art. And Vandermeer, it's great to hear you say that he's alive and well in the GreatBase, because he definitely was an artist. And he was not far off when it comes down to a few things. Braden, which is amazing, he's been gone for, I think, 8 years in October, but he's still ahead of his time. Let's transition to the GreatBase. I think with just talking about certification, we have 5 courses. We have exams with those courses. But I think with peer teaching, that would be one that could help the tennis community at large. And also we're going to talk about making tennis more affordable. But even training the parent as a practice partner. I'm always telling parents, you can get out on the court. You don't have to tell your kid how to hit the ball, but just where to hit the ball. Okay, I'm just going to feed you, 10 forehand volleys. Can you hit straight ahead, hit the ball between it goes over the service line. You can even take, a lot of people don't like to do this I used to do it all the time, and then it got to the point where it's like, no, don't do that. Just take chalk and all you got to do is have a rainy day and it goes away. But, just take a piece of chalk and make a big square on the court. I mean, a hula hoop is better. A clay court, you just make a circle. But people can't hit the target. But I do think that those would be certifications that would be fun and help lower the cost if young people were trained. I know that PTR, they showed up on a lot of college campuses. I don't know how that program's going, but I'm always telling kids that they should put in their bio that they're a student of the game. They study tennis, and they're both a teacher and a player. And you can teach tennis as a hobby. You can teach tennis as a supplemental, part-time income, or full-time. But let's transition and let's start talking about the report that you sent me.
Yeah. So the idea of this was obviously listening to all the podcasts, and I was so proud of myself for being caught up. And then you released one last night, so I got to get the dog out for a walk and get my headphones in. But pulling together sort of various ideas I heard from different podcast guests, and trying to look at things that weren't necessarily a technical way to improve the game. Sort of listen to what everyone else had to say in terms of maybe the economics behind it, the education behind it. What are some of the things that maybe could help grow tennis that go beyond just how to hit the ball or how to efficiently hit the ball. And the first thing that came up that I heard a couple times, and from you and a couple other people, were, I know the GreatBase is now a continuing education certified, but just doing more technical coaching certifications and trying to get those more mainstream, have them be continuing education approved. And I mentioned, Andy and Leo and yourself a few years back, right before the pandemic hit, and you guys started using social media as an open educational resource, which is free access to education. It's a trend in higher education with, sort of the cost of education, the cost of textbooks, the cost of class, everything like that. OER is really a huge movement across college campuses in learning and education in general. And I think if there could be more of that, move it from a word of mouth to sort of an established OER that is certified, that does meet continuing education requirements, I think it would be fantastic in terms of helping to grow the game and helping to train coaches and players.
Yeah, no, your report is thorough. Some shout outs. You mentioned Kevin Record, who we had early on, a high school coach, and he's as many as 100 people hanging around his tennis courts, and he brings them in by getting them to hit a tweener. We have some progressions. If people went online and just put GreatBase tweener, they would see how we've broken that shot down to progressions. And it's all connected. And I think just use the word progression. I mean, there was Elaine Mason before Dennis Vandermeer, but to me, I think progression, I think of Dennis Vandermeer just breaking it down and just all these different exercises, and you put it together. But shout out to Dave Secker and his head coach and the players. NC State just won the ACC. I think it was first time in 25 years, and they beat UNC that was undefeated. But Dave Secker, with his camps, he takes that idea from the podcast with Coach Secker, and as all the kids learn how to, try to hit a tweener.
Kevin.
Go ahead.
Kevin was an interesting one. You had two high school coaches. You had Kevin Record and
Alex.
From Pittsburgh, right? Yeah, and Kevin was talking about getting as many people on the court as humanly possible. Even if they were playing another sport, he was trying to work out, time to get them on. And for that age group, for high school age group, there's typically not a lot of, municipal offerings, recreational offerings. Those are for kids, juniors, coming up till about the age of 12, 13. And then it kind of shifts focus to adults after that. So the logic from the cities and towns perspective is that their funding is then going to the high school. The high school should be, sort of picking up that tab at that point. So to hear Kevin sort of having a very inclusive, open, program, I think there's still an opportunity for kids to learn at, what would be a later age, like myself in high school. And that's, also a function of economics. Alex was mentioning that there's a very affluent area. Kids probably have more access to education and training. So he runs a competitive cut program, which is, for his area, it might be the right decision. But, as much as you can get people to learn to play, if you're strictly focused on growing the game, then I think you have to find a way to engage that, say, like 13 to 18-year-old group that might not be able to join adult leagues and maybe have grown out of sort of the younger junior program.
No, it's really been a long time since high schools have had a freshman and a JV team. Usually it's just one team, and that keeps everybody going. I think if high school coaches have that feeder system to the junior highs, the sooner the better. But I think also too, Kevin is much older than Alex, and both. I think initially a young coach, going in and winning high school state titles. Kevin has done that, and with he still tries to put out the best team, but I think Kevin would say that in his parents, his father just recently passed away, but he was his own. The dad was Kevin's high school coach, and that tennis is a lifetime sport. And we do get to the point where you got to try to push both. It's a competitive side, but at the same time, what about, say, on a college campus, the club team? I think that's something we've touched upon too in these podcasts, is to have them become one, where the club team supports the competitive team, and they're not unknown to each other. The people, the community, they get to know each other. Same thing with years ago, a tennis coach, their primary source of income was their camp. And I think there was more player development because, college coaches today, I'm always telling them, I said, don't stop teaching beginners because you'll lose your skill set. If you're not teaching beginners, you're going to lose your developmental skills. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I thankfully stick mostly with beginners, but it helps to reinforce the basics when you're constantly teaching beginners.
Yeah, with adult beginners, I think it's much easier for young kids, a kid who's in an early childhood development class, to take up tennis. What's your thought on adult beginners as far as staying with the game? It's such a difficult sport, and we talk about pickleball all the time now. What are your thoughts on that? Just adult beginners.
Yeah, I think if you can get them to sort of leave the session, set the expectations. We're going to learn some ground strokes. We're going to learn how to rally. Then we're going to learn some game points and go through. You don't have them for 6 months. It's not in a recreation program. They're not signing up for 6 months worth of lessons. They're signing up for 6 weeks worth of lessons. And the expectation is that there's going to be a social component, that they're going to be able to step out on the court. They're going to be able to, keep score and play games. So the logic is get the fundamentals up front as soon as possible and reinforce those throughout, because you're not going to be able to spend the 6 weeks just working on forehand. It's not feasible. But if you can get the players to play out points, keep score, know a little bit of tennis etiquette when they're walking out after 6 weeks, I see way more repeat people. They come back for another session, or they join one of the local leagues, or they are trading phone numbers with other people in the class, and they're coming back out to play. But I personally have had quite a lot of success with people who come out and enjoy it and try to continue to play. Keeping in mind that, if I was developing a junior, I probably would spend, more time focusing on how to hit a basic forehand versus approach shot forehand versus a swinging volley forehand side. It is, at this point, it's let's get the shape of the string, let's have the right grip, let's try to get the basic stance and footwork right. And then, once we're good there, we're going to move right into the next shot and do the same thing. So, 6 weeks to play is kind of the logic that I've found. And it is difficult because you want to teach more. But when you're just pretty much teaching beginners for the most part. You have to get them out playing so that they can go and enjoy it, and they want to come back for other things.
Goes back a long, long time ago. We just had a student, he's going home to the Hamptons for a couple weeks, and I said, the Hamptons, I was there in 1979. I haven't been back since, but with All-American sports. So I think, maybe just go, I was 24 years old. I was really new to tennis. I had been knocking tennis balls around for 5 years, been a volunteer for 3. So it was my second year teaching tennis, and I was the adult camp director. It was at that time, going back to what you talked about with safe play, is that the company had a policy that you could not be a junior director unless you were married. But anyway, long story short, short story long, is we had instruction during the day, and then there was a round robin at night. And once I was a director, how's it go? Don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. So we had a beer and wine round robin, a mixer. And I just changed it. Said, no, come on out. We'll have the beer and we'll have the wine. But it was teaching people how to practice. And they loved it. Dropping balls, tossing balls to one another, just repeating the drills. But I think what you mentioned the word social is if you can just get people to come out on the court. But I've mentioned it several times. Mike Custard, who we need to get on as a guest as well. He's somebody I trained to teach tennis a long, long time ago. And I just remember he had a program where you had to play 1 year, the adults, to take this class for a year. Just all these different ideas. Tennis Corporation of America, they use Dennis's instant tennis. And what they would do between the end of the outdoor season and the beginning of the summer season, so say the month of May, up in their clubs in the Northeast or the Midwest, is they would teach people how to use the ball machine, give out passes where they weren't going out to use the ball machine by themselves, So just different ways to get people on the court, because it takes a while. People get stuck in, and I think the Braden line, and that's what we fight in pickleball. Steve Robertson, who's on our podcast just a week ago, he called it the light switch sport. Just turn on the light switch and you can play. That Braden used to say, adult beginners, they would buy the clothes and wear them in the grocery store. But what's the retention? I think that's something to ask you as far as people staying with the game. One thing to get them in the game, but then to get them to stay the game.
Right. So when I was at one point I was running 4 sessions. So it was spring, summer 1, summer 2, fall. And I was doing beginner, advanced beginner, and intermediate. And the intermediate, they're already in. They're already playing. They're looking to get better. They're looking social. I'd say they're like 75%, showing up to just about every class or showing up throughout, and then trying to come back for more. Advanced beginner, they were people who played, say, in high school, and then they're coming back 20 years later. A lot of that type of group. And the people who loved it in high school loved it again. The people who were frustrated in high school were frustrated again. It was a little bit of I think reaffirming why they stayed with the game or are back, or why they walked away from the game. I would look for, let's say, 12 people, 3 courts, 4 people per court. I would hope to have between 6 and 8 of them back at the end. And then the true beginners, the people that didn't come, the people that had never played before, if they had prior athletic experience, they were much more likely to come back. The people who did not have an athletic background and were looking to pick up the play, they seemed to be the ones who would sort of drop the fastest, or were unlikely to take another course or try to move up into the next group. And that I would look for, usually 6 at most would sort of stick through, so from 12 to 6. And the athletic background is tough because you could do a drill or two here or there, but for your 1 hour a week, they really had to be trying something at home. They really had to be, basic stuff like learning to throw and catch and hand-to-eye coordination. And that, from where I was teaching, I was not in a position to sort of work with someone 3-4 days a week to try to build that type of skill set. So yeah, I would say, I'm looking to take in like 8 to 10 out of the intermediate, more in the 8 range, 6 to 8 for the advanced beginner and 4 to 6 in the beginners, to have them progress through from day one through the end of the 6 or 7 weeks.
What would be a thought that comes to your mind, a point or two on cardio tennis, just from a distant? I've been through the cardio program. I certainly observed it. I hosted a training session many years ago. But it just seemed to me from cardio tennis that there was no instruction. And I think there's a place for that for sure. Like, okay, let's have a, stress buster, hit 1 billion balls. And then you have a course title, and then you have a course description, and you let people basically know this is not a lesson, this is a workout. But accountability from an accountant, what do you think? Does cardio tennis, does that help grow tennis over the years? It's very much a program without instruction?
Yeah, so I worked at a club, the Mount Auburn Club, just the front desk, and there were a couple of the fitness trainers who really wanted to push the cardio tennis, but it was more from the fitness side. The coaches really weren't running too much of the cardio tennis. They were more focused on instruction and technical changes and tactical issues. But the trainers, they were just looking for any way to make fitness more fun. And I think from that perspective, just getting people out on the court hitting a ball can absolutely help, pique an interest. If someone comes out and does a cardio tennis and they hit, 10 out of 15 balls into the net, I wouldn't surprise me if they're knocking on one of the tennis instructors' doors the next week saying, I think I need to work on a forehand. But overall, I think it is more a fitness trend. Same with people who are maybe riding the Peloton. I don't think they're all of a sudden sign up to go ride in the hills of France. I think they're there for the fitness, the social aspect, the enjoyment. But if they maybe wanted to do a triathlon or something later, I'm sure it would sort of pique their interest towards it, as opposed to giving them a lifetime sport. But if you start out with technical instruction, I think you stay with tennis longer. But I don't think the cardio tennis is hurting the growth of tennis.
Well, that's how Michelle Krause. I have to ask Andres Barbosa, our fact checker. I believe that's her last name, Michelle Krause, a long time. She was at our facility. We were hosting a cardio workout and a clinic. And I remember her saying, well, Steve, I know that you work with advanced players, so as far as feeding balls fast, she had made the assumption, well, you guys won't feed the ball as fast as we do. But the Braden rapid fire, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You just grab 3 balls, put the racket in front of you, and it's like someone with a drumstick, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you can feed, you feed as fast as any ball machine, 3, 3, 3, and get people just going, whether it's a peel off, across the baseline, reverse across the baseline, up and back. I'll never forget doing a corporate outing. This is my memory. I go back, reflective thought. It was Dave Anderson, who I mentioned quite often, and one other coach. And the other coach, he never accepted the fact that he needed to learn to feed that one way. And a lot of people showed up, and 15 people on a court, and we had no problem, pumping the balls out. And so 2 of the courts were just moving. But the one coach didn't have the skill of feeding the ball fast. At one point, we ran a stress buster, and it was based on your fitness level. And there was a big fitness component to the club, and big, large commercial club, Tennis Corporation America. But it was just, the boot camp was the boot camp. I mean, this is for the Marines. You've got to be pretty tough to go through this class. But I do think that's where, again, coming back to pickleball, instant coffee. We had one time, mom said to us, you don't microwave tennis. So we take a pretty slow approach to teaching people. And I think that's one thing is that if they're working slowly with a goal-oriented player in a junior development setting, And then you just have to use some logic. Well, the adult, if they could play once a week, twice a week, that would be great. How can we make that work? So they're not necessarily going to perfect their strokes. And then you can slow it down. So, okay, just make a circle. It's like catching a ball on the volley. Just push forward. And then from that initial unit turn of the racket, set like a volley, just circle around, hit a ground stroke. So really make it simple, simple, simple. So it's not a dissertation on how to hit a tennis ball. But I think just the idea of how to get them back in the game and get a practice partner and try to come out and rally. And coming back, I know in your report here you have indoor court time. It's so awkward at best for two people to rent a court, indoor court fees, and they can't even hit the ball. Why don't you comment a little bit on the cost of indoor courts?
Yeah. So again, I did work at a private club for a while, and I mean, it was ridiculous. It was $130 a month just to be a member. And then it was, I want to say it was close to $50 an hour without instruction. And then with instruction, it was about $120 an hour. It's tough. And this is not bashing the clubs. The cost of real estate, taxes, facilities, energy costs, especially this past winter, I mean, it's continuously driving the price up. It's just making the indoor court exclusive. It's really just a population of rich people at this point that can afford it, that can really step out and have success. And some of the ideas that I was putting together and people were mentioning on the podcast was, to defray some of those costs. Richard Hernandez's group dynamics push. That's the number one thing. I've gone through it in my head. I've looked at it, thought about the numbers. You have to have bigger classes with a smaller per person cost. You can still pay the coach a good wage, and the facility can still make money because you're putting more people on fewer courts. But that is the number one solution is get people on courts and teach in a group dynamic setting, so that people have a real solid learning environment, and then they can find a way to afford classes. I mean, I'm in New England. You mentioned, I've taught into November. It's not fun, and I have taught in March, and it's not fun. It's cold. It's awful outside. The balls barely bounce. I have taught in snow. I've taught when it's snowing out, and then you're worried about people slipping or doing silly things. So if you have to be indoors in the winter, you have to have group dynamics. I believe that's the number one thing to sort of help get players back on the court and get better, especially in tough climates, or in the areas where, it is really expensive to live, where people might not have access to other facilities. Beyond that, some of the other ideas I had was there has to be a little bit more public funding. I know you've spoken about sort of the USTA, I'll say aggregating funds in sort of New York and Orlando. I looked at their website to see what types of help they have for facilities, and they have different categories. They have a category 1, 2, 3, but the maximum sort of grant that you can apply for is $55,000 for a 9 or more court outdoor facility. And they don't disclose how much funding they would support for an indoor facility, but $55,000 for 9 courts is, I think, it's nothing. It's not a dent. It's barely there. I don't know how clubs today start. The seed money that they must require to open up a new club or to buy an existing club, it must be just extremely expensive. But there's other funding available to help people and to get people on the court. And there's other grants available for sort of diversity, equity initiatives out there. There's junior program and regional funding. There's funding and resources to help offset administrative costs. But I think there just needs to be more court building, more indoor, municipal, federal funded court, whatever has to happen. But the money can't reside in two locations across the country. It has to be spread out.
Oh, you just said so many things we come back to with, but seasonal play. where you live, just to get for people to play outdoors. So in Boston, what would you say? 6 months? 6 months? Six months indoors?
Do April to October is what we usually do. So we'll try to be outdoors for 7 months.
Yeah, just to get people, because years ago, people didn't even think about playing indoors in the wintertime. It was really the tiebreaker was a boom for so many things, and certainly for indoor court time. The tiebreaker, as we've talked about many times, put tennis on TV. But just to get people to play on an outdoor court, I touch base with Ed Weiss for our listeners. And right now I'm in a position where we put more time into the GreatBase. We are a nonprofit, but Ed wrote a great book based on Welby Van Horn's work, and with Ed and with Welby's son Stuart, we're gonna definitely get that up on our website. With I guess so many things. The USTA, let's just focus on that, where they have 2 sites, but I would say that those 2 sites, there's a big emphasis. A lot of dollars are spent on. I mean, they do everything. I mean, I was a neighbor. I lived 3 miles away or 5 miles away for 3 years from Lake Nona, the national campus in Orlando. A lot of money is spent on the competitive players, and I think the USTA. Well, if we get players in the top 100, and there's been a lot of recent success with the men, that will help grow the game, and certainly I think it will. Or it would, perhaps it has in the past. When you think about a Connors and a McEnroe, or then a Sampras and an Agassi. But no, I do think more money should be spent on grassroots development. Your first degree was in marketing. I think the same question can be asked. When people are selling rackets, it works. I think it works if the very top players are using the racket, but I don't know if that works in player development. So in other words, if the people on TV are using such and such racket, Joe Public, the beginner, might buy one of those rackets, but that doesn't necessarily going to help him on how to swing their racket.
Yeah, in real juniors, it's not. With baseball, you grow up with the baseball cards. You recognize the players. You want the gum long before you care about the player.
Say that again. Say that last thing again.
You want the gum out of the baseball wrapper long before you know who the players are. But that's kind of how it gets you engaged. But the young juniors, they don't know who the professional players in top 100 are. The adults do, and they might get excited about it and buy their junior a racket based off that. But for junior development, you just need to get them on the court. They don't know who Taylor Fritz is. They just want to be playing tennis. They're playing a new sport. My son has no idea who a baseball player is, but he's excited to play t-ball. He wants to hit a ball off the tee. That's what gets him going.
With pickleball, what do you foresee happening with pickleball? I mean, I guess it was 1 year before racquetball. Racquetball was an official sport in '68, pickleball in '67. It's growing fast. And I think that we're making lots of mistakes in pickleball. I was a little disappointed. We're very disappointed with the PTR and the USPTA, where overnight, they're pickleball organizations. I think that obviously comes back to money, but I think of tennis teachers today that are converting to pickleball. Experts don't make it up as they go along, but the BS artist does. And I think people are making the mistake with pickleball is not just presenting it as a transition sport to tennis. I think that we in tennis should make a big push, say, hey, learn tennis skills. I understand that, you play more swing volleys and conventional volleys, and there are some differences, but that's what makes someone an expert. Okay, I'm going to tell you all the differences. You play tennis, but this is what you really have to learn. I heard Sam Querrey say, if you come from tennis to pickleball, you're 90% there. There are 10% of nuances to learn to be able to play pickleball. But I don't know if people are really listening to his comment. It's like, okay, let's, just like with the PTR, Dennis Vandermeer, a ready position, a unit turn, and what, he was standing for. I connected with Dennis in the 70s, but he was, decades before me. But yeah, comment a little bit on pickleball, like pickleball in Boston, and how you see it as a plus, a minus, and how we're going to lose adult beginners to pickleball.
Yeah. So I was first introduced to pickleball. My parents moved to a facility down there in Florida, the Villages, about 10 years ago. And they were the first, area that I ever saw that had designated pickleball courts and rackets, and it was pickup, but it was huge down there. And then you come home and it was nothing. It was really for retirement age. People who were looking to stay active but couldn't necessarily move around the court for tennis. So it was interesting. Played it, loved it. It was super fun. Up here, the benefits of it are twofold. One is there's more space. You can play more people on one court's worth of tennis in pickleball. And two is you can play when it's cold. As long as there isn't physically snow on the ground, the ball will still bounce when it's cold. So this particular winter was extremely mild up here, and there are people playing pickleball every single weekend, January, February, March. And that, that's a little bit unusual to not really have much snow on the ground at all. But it's instant access. You don't have to go pay. You can be playing on a public court outside in 30-degree weather, a sport. So I think it's growing because it is more accessible. And I don't love that it is, you've mentioned, invading tennis. I do wish that if there was an investment in pickleball, that it wasn't, in spite of tennis. I wish they could exist more together. But, in my own town right now, they've had a couple town meetings on how to break up pickleball time versus tennis time. And there's signs on the fence with, grids about pickleball is during this time and lessons are that time and tennis is during these weeks and you can reserve courts on this website. It's becoming a lot. I like it. It's an absolutely fun sport. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of pieces that, could complement your tennis game or vice versa. I think it does help sort of getting people up closer to the net and getting comfortable with reaction. A lot of people just aren't comfortable with the net. But I do hate when every time I see a tennis court go away for pickleball court, it breaks my heart a little bit.
With pickleball, obviously I'm coming across where, what can pickleball learn from tennis? But I think the flip side is what can tennis learn from pickleball? I think that we have to find a way that we can go back to more casual play, where tennis is, not so structured. League play, the NTRP, everything has two sides. When the National Tennis Rating Program came out, 2.0, 2.5, 3.0, all the way up to 7. That pretty much killed junior versus veteran matches, where young kids would call up an adult and say, hey, could we play this week, play once a week? I think also, too, the kids become programmed out. It used to be years ago where you just took a private lesson. But, more casual play. In other words, you're not good enough to be on a team, but, how could we have more casual play? And I think that's how you could interface. Group dynamics is, when you think of a series of lessons, but a series of events as well that go with that. I think that, like Steve Campbell, he was a guest on our podcast, and I'm going to still connect with Steve, and I was scheduled to go there for the summer. But, coming back to one thing that we're doing right now is having 10 backboards built for his facility, those GreatBase backboards. And that's where someone who controls indoor courts is like, all right, we can get a lot of people hitting balls on one indoor court. Then it's like, okay, I got to take them down, and where can I store them? And so, you have to ask all those type of questions to make a court convertible. But with pickleball, I think that, Steve is what happened, if I didn't mention it earlier. So he takes over this facility, and I think they have 19 clay, but 3 were in really bad shape. But what they found out once Steve got there is he had them dig, and they were just clay courts that were built over hard courts. So it was a very easy fix to say, well, let's just take up all the clay and solve our pickleball problem, and we'll just take these 3 courts and make them pickleball courts. And he's being open to learning, but I think it's a matter of learning how to program pickleball. I don't think it should be the wild, wild west and people are just making up instruction as they go. That was one of the growing pains of tennis, and where a lot of people ended up going towards racquetball. But for some reason, my gut tells me that pickleball is going to stick around a lot longer than racquetball.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, simply from racquetball, especially around here, again, racquetball requires the indoor facility, and pickleball doesn't. For a lot of the year, you can be a lot longer of the year. You can be outside playing pickleball. But going back to what you mentioned about juniors calling up adults to play, one of the problem solutions that I had listed was aggregating a list of tennis networks of how to find players, leagues that are out there. I've been a part of for a couple different leagues, the Tennis League Network. And the guy actually lives down the street from me, and I met him, but he set up these regional tennis league networks that have singles and doubles play, weekend tournaments. They do a ladder format. They do open hit. If you just want to meet people in your area, that's extremely affordable. It's all outdoor. You use public courts, schedule in your own time. It's pretty much just a list generator for people who want to play tennis, who are looking for other people in the area to play tennis. But there's a lot of resources out there that even the USTA has some stuff. PlayLocal.com, Universal Tennis, TennisPal.com. There's what used to be sort of a sign-up sheet at your local rec hall. There are websites that have regional sort of player and meetup opportunities. One of the things is, go find people to play with. Sign up for these websites. Look for the inexpected ways to find yourself on court. Sort of rediscover playing and loving the game.
I think one solution is compensation packages. Money, follow the money. Ladders have gone away too much, or almost to the point. It's good to hear you just mention there's ladders. Used to be there'd be a city tournament. The city tournament would be over 6 or 7 weeks. From the city tournament, the annual city tournament, there'd be a ladder formed. Even flex leagues where you can call people up. Someone at a front desk, and it is one of the most difficult things to do, is find people games. But I do think that, to point fingers at the tennis teaching pro, is many of them are compensated just by lesson revenue. And, so we stop and think, okay, what does a tennis teacher do? And I certainly have been in many different pathways in my career in tennis, but many times they think, okay, you're really only catering to, 20 people per week. Because, I think throughout too many tennis clubs, the theme is, you really can't learn in group lessons. If you really want to learn, you got to take it private. And I just think that's a major red flag. You could touch upon that. You're teaching a lot of adults and beginners, but you do it most in group formats. What's done for the most part in Boston? You find a lot of privates or a lot of groups?
Rich people take privates and poor people do groups is really the big thing. If it's group inside of a club, you will get most a group of 4. Every now and again a team will practice together, and you might get the team to show up and do a group of 8 or more, and it'll be facilitated with a coach. But if you're taking private lessons, you literally have the money to spend on it. If you don't, you don't. And then you're looking for group lessons. I've always been associated with a town or a city, and it's subsidized. I've had them as cheap as $36 for 7 lessons, so under $6 a lesson for group dynamics. And I found that if you sign up for it, if you're sticking around towards the end, it becomes
like a semi-private or a small group sometimes. So it's beneficial to the people. It goes back to the point with Richard Hernandez. If you learn and can effectively teach group dynamics, overall, you will help grow tennis. I think you'll have a larger population you can teach from. I think it'll be more inclusive. And I think it's just about the number one sensible solution for indoor court time. Again, for indoor court time.
It just circles back with Dennis Vandermeer. I can remember, students, they just knew that Braden had more of a handle on the nuts and bolts. And I said, no, I remember Jim Lair saying that you had to have the opportunity to watch Dennis work in person. And it was just like, wow, amazing. But that was part of the 70s where it was very common to have so many people on a court. I think in Atlanta, the Alta Leagues in Atlanta, maybe that's still the case, but I remember a gentleman who was running a program called Go Tennis, Tennis to Go, and he had hired a guy by the name of David Wiest who had trained and teach tennis, and he couldn't believe how Wiest could teach so many people at one time. So then I was brought in to train as coaches on group dynamics. To be creative, say for example, indoor court time, what happens is the club owners, they want to make sure they sell the courts. So the first thing they're going to do is the season court holders that, okay, how does it work from October through April? If it's, say, 32 weeks, okay, this group is going to buy this court. They're going to play every Tuesday for 32 weeks. And understandably, they want that guaranteed money. But so once that's set, and you have the leagues, or I shouldn't say the leagues, the court holders, you say, well, we can play 5-player doubles, and the pro can come out. And a lot of times, Vic Braden, you say, give me your money, but don't tell me anything. I just want to hit balls. Don't tell me anything about strokes. So that's really the service side. But you can take a pro out there with, there's 5 on the court, and you can play more points with 5 on the court. And then you could do it where people can bring a guest. But just even that format where the whole year they're not meeting that many people. They're just in their foursome. And so they come into the club and they just know the people that are in their group. But to have a pro could be the person, and that creates more revenue for the pro. But then, teach people, okay, let's get the pro out there and show them how to play 8-player doubles. And, it's not quite the same, but if you take the serve and the return out of it, they can actually play more points with the coach being on the side, just putting the ball in play. So I do think that what Richard was talking about is people need continual education on group dynamics. I was just telling a young coach the other day that he's going to get better and better at it. He's just starting out. And the more, just from experience, is that, over and over again, you don't necessarily learn the trade, but you learn the tricks of the trade. But I just think that it becomes status quo. This is what we do with so when you think about indoor court time, the bulk of the time goes to those season court holders. And
yeah, without a doubt. It's the things that I've seen successful in terms of bringing a group together, the shot clinics, so shot of the week type clinic, tends to bring a larger group that defrays the cost a little bit. I've seen night owl tennis. I like early morning and night owl tennis, so it's cheaper to get on court because it's typically the times that are more difficult to fill. I've played a couple in a local league where it's $15 for non-members, $10 for members, and it's an hour and a half of rotating doubles. Just your partner changes every 30 minutes for an hour and a half on court, and that type of thing is fantastic. I always at the end of October, I get the players come up to me and they say, where do I go next? Where should I go play? And if your club offers something like that, where students can get out on court, they don't have to pay a membership fee, if they can find their way without, losing their shirt, that's where I recommend. That's the places that I tell them to go. Go check out this club versus that club. This place offers, shot of the week clinics. They offer some drop-in time. They'll offer a group play or supervised team practice, things like that. That's what you need, because you don't have to be on a court. You've mentioned a couple of times. You don't have to. You have to be on a court 6 days a week to get better. But if you're from an area where you're snowed in for a while, if you can get out there once a week and not feel like you're losing your shirt, you can get better. And then you don't feel like you lost what you spent all that time and energy learning from spring to fall over the course of the winter.
I think one program to have is Train Like a Junior. So adults, if they want to do additional practice time, they can come to a junior development class. And I think that, again, it comes down to Peter Burwash, the late Peter Burwash, the personality of the pro. Can you pull it off? And if you have station training and you're teaching the serve and we're going to use the sock, you just backboards, Lenny Schloss from a couple weeks ago, the Billie Jean King eye coach, you have all these teaching aids on a court. And, obviously the holder of the indoor, the owner, that court needs to be convertible. As I said, you got to be able to knock it down. But then tennis just seems like it's so clicky. Like, no, I need to learn the forehand. And that's where I think in a really true tennis culture, then when the adult players can start to appreciate how the juniors are hitting the ball. And then when the adult players realize that the juniors are better than they are. But I think really from top to bottom, the sandwich effect. I mean, you got to have the piece of bread on the bottom and the piece of bread on the top to have it be a sandwich, and to hit it from all angles. I think less pros. I think if you have Trained Like a Junior, and some parents, I shouldn't say parents, I'm so much in the junior world, but so some adults are going to come out, and you can handle the numbers. You can handle an extra person, because it's not I like to stay away from ratios. The parents are going to ask how many people on the court. And go, well, we have stations. We don't really think about it as courts. And on 7,200 square feet, you can create many stations. I tell people all the time, well, if I were to walk through your indoor club, I would first of all see, where can I run a class indoors? Where can I have a chalk talk? Where can I create a classroom? And then also, where can I do some footwork? Where can I do some fitness? And, inclement weather, obviously snow and rain is a problem, but, to even go to the parking lot. But less pros, if you start to implement a Train Like a Junior program, you can have less pros. And it's not like you're trying to eliminate jobs, but I think that's what has made America great, is competition. I think too many times what happens at an indoor club, maybe all clubs, is it's kind of like, well, we have all these pros, now we tell them go fish. In other words, the person who's a better salesperson will end up having more lessons than the person who's a better teacher. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so I personally use stations. Whenever we're teaching a new stroke, especially in the group setting, we usually do an associated fence drill. I do have a Billie Jean eye coach. I also just talk through, if you're at home, turn your bicycle upside down, and that can be a topspin trainer, things like that. But then when you do have those, when you have those odd numbers, if you have 7 people out there, one person can be doing a fence drill. I like them because it's something that they can take home. You actually don't need another player to get better. This is something you can practice. You can draw the shape of the stroke on the wall. I learned this from GreatBase, seeing the chalk outlines, and I also keep 2 cones, short and tall, and I have the cone drill. So we'll run through that with people who might not be sort of understanding or needs to slow it down. I also think, going back to video, I think what can be seen and taught from looking at one video, probably amounts to 10 lessons. Once you see it and you realize it, and then your coach can talk to you about it, you can see it, you probably don't need as many private sessions. You don't need as many. You can go back to your group dynamic and understand, when you're getting that feedback, exactly what's being talked about. So I've always loved the stories you've kind of told about coaches who will film everyone in the first 10 minutes. You're going, this guy up, film the strokes, this
this woman up, film their strokes, move them on, and then do a feedback and breakdown immediately. Try to get it right back to them. So I haven't done a ton of film stuff, but when I do, I try to turn it around quickly. I want them to be able to look at it before they go out and try to play or practice next time, so that they can start to see the things right away, and then they can start to reference when they're hearing feedback what's going on. You're walking a fine line for sure in terms of having more coaches, less coaches. I don't see a lot of new coaches joining facilities. There's always job postings, here and there, but usually when you walk into a facility, the coaches have been there a long time, and they have their specific clientele. I think it's more about changing the focus from how do I make my revenue with the same 5 people versus how can I get 10 people out here and not feel like I'm losing out. And I think that's more of there's always people looking. There are people, every single time I teach a lesson, I come home, I tell my wife, because she working a full-time job and then doing this part-time, having 2 kids at home. I always tell her, I'm like, when I'm ready to do the tennis full-time, I got asked again for private lessons, or I got asked again, where can I play? Where do I go next? The sport is ripe for growth. It's just a matter of being able to cater to that many people. It's being able to from a capacity standpoint, bring more people in and get them on the court and be effectively teaching them. So, coaches doing supervised play, like you mentioned, or like feeding the balls in. Coaches doing, I love stations. Again, I think they're fantastic. So if you have train like a junior, come in and really work on the particulars, station to station. I've seen in team practices, adults, they listen to the whistle just like a kid does. So if you've got a whistle, or if you're doing the metronome thing that Ilya works with, adults respond well. You've also said that, train the adults like the kids and the kids like the adults. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different methods to sort of get people out on the court. And again, if you have 8 people on one court, the one court's cost is a lot less, versus 2 people or 1 person on one court.
Steve, we've touched upon this, but why don't you go into a little more detail on subscription-based court time? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so you're seeing subscription-based, especially in the fitness world. People do not pay per class anymore. They're signing up to use a facility. They're signing up a certain number of times, or for a month, or for a year. And there are facilities out there that have subscription-based membership, but not necessarily court time. Usually, if you're paying a membership, you're still paying for your court time. And, this doesn't necessarily make it cheaper, but it makes the per instance cheaper. So the idea is simply, if you're going to sign up, maybe the club just has more open offerings. Maybe they are offering shot of the week, or, beginner, intermediate, advanced lessons. Maybe they are doing like you mentioned, a junior training program, focus specific drills. You could do, have open film sessions or classroom reviews. But, you could operate it more as a drop-in program. And like I said, you're seeing it a lot. I mean, cycling classes, Orange Theory, the running classes, things like that. People seem willing to pay for it because they feel like they're getting more value out of it. If I'm paying $200 a month, but I'm showing up, 10, 12 times, then my per instance cost is way down than if I'm paying for 2 classes, 2 1-hour classes that would cost the same $200 a month. And that's all made up numbers. But I'm curious to know if there's any clubs that sort of have an open policy about, you sign up for your subscription and then you get more out of it by just showing up more, utilizing the court more, bringing more people in, trying to program around a whole population of subscribers, as opposed to individual people trying to sell their one class or their one group lesson or whatever it may be.
No, that's a good point. With a competitive ball, I mean, people want to rally, people want to play. but they have an open policy, that comes back to the skill level of the coach, and then open learning where at all hours, they have that one court, 7,200 square feet that, you could even have one pro manning that, and now it's 2 courts, and then all levels can go to that court. You can improve your strokes and get reps in, but that doesn't mean the compatibility factor that, okay, we can now have people rotate and play with one another. So I do think that in that sense, the UTR is very accurate. If you're a 10, you're a 10. Your level of play. It's like Braden used to say, if you're the worst on the ladder, no one cheated you the bottom. But yeah, I do think that is very interesting what you're saying about how a fitness center works with subscription-based programming. What about Competent Coaching Network? Your thoughts on that? That's in one of your down as a solution.
Yeah, this idea more comes. Some people have mentioned on the podcast in the past about, we need a list. We need a list of people who have been a part of, or have come from, or are part of that coaching tree of GreatBase. And it sounds like a daunting task. You can just look at the names of the podcast and put that together. But I was thinking more of an open, just like a Google sheet or a shared worksheet where people can just put down their name, sort of how they're associated, maybe the resources that they offer. And then, yourself, you can just look at it and say, oh yeah, that person's trained GreatBase. This person is, they run that facility. Maybe their focus is on junior development versus adult or beginner versus, people who are knocking on the door of college. People who have, little things, regripping, stringing. Maybe there's people who are professional racket demos. I know you had the professional stringer on the podcast. That was an interesting podcast as well. People who run camps or are team coaches, but just essentially have a list that then you can verify and say, yes, this person's connected in this way, shape, or form. Then the user, who you always talked about, the parents who, they don't know what they don't know. And now they have a verified list. They can say, okay, this person does come from the GreatBase. They may not need to know what they're looking for if they have the list right in front of them and says, this person is going to teach this way. They have facilities here. They're teaching, for camps or teams or group lessons. They offer video analysis, classroom, whatever it may be. But if there's just a list of a coaching network, it'd be fantastic. And the idea also came from, I kept seeing other people on other social media teaching things that I recognized. And I know you've talked about Ryan Reedy. You look at his stuff and you just say, oh, it looks GreatBase. I also follow Joel Myers and Gibran Mohammadi, Brookside and Brookhaven. I follow their 2 accounts. And I'm watching and I'm saying to myself, there's a level of comfort when you see 10 different people teaching successfully a very similar method than if you go to one website versus another. And I think there's sort of a strength in numbers there, sort of supporting these other people who really do have solid technical bases, and maybe their art of coaching is slightly different. That, you just have this network available to your students that they can pick and choose, but know that they're going to have fundamentally sound ground strokes.
With, the different programs that you mentioned, have people work together, have people work for the good of the game. Why don't you talk about give back? You have that as a solution as well.
Yeah. So again, I found it interesting. I honestly forget who it was, but someone was mentioning that Vic Braden used to, he'd have his dollar clinic or his free clinic, and then, it'd be over after an hour and he would keep teaching for the extra half hour. And then that'd be over, and anyone who was still there after 2 hours talking, they'd be back at his house. I was thinking my wife would kill me if after every lesson I came home. But the idea is there's giving back and doing it with some substance. It's caring about it. So, the idea is not that you go out and coach and give away everything for free, but running a dollar clinic, running a free session, doing a shot of the week, taking some time to really develop a way to give back into the tennis community. And we didn't just, that was just the Vic Braden example that I heard on the podcast the other day, but Ed Weiss mentioned it through his grassroots tennis and education in Connecticut. You talked about tenacity. Tenacity is very big around Boston. But I know a couple of people who run programs for them, and it's important for them. A lot of times it's former college players coming out of school. They do it almost as like a service year or a year to give back. I think Ry Tarpley, when he was on the podcast, mentioned that he was a part of a program, or maybe an after-school program or something. I don't remember the name he mentioned. But there's a component where it's one of those ideas where if everyone gave an hour a week, I think it would fulfill a lot of sort of the thirst for knowledge and people who are looking for that other time to get out there. It's not about going bankrupt by giving everything away for free, but maybe piquing some interest and giving some people some opportunities that they maybe wouldn't normally have.
Story on Vic Braden Free Clinic holiday gift. For many, many years in a row, it was a decade anyway, close to it, give or take, throughout the 80s. Fair enough. I was training tennis teachers, and he ran the program in April, he ran the program in December. So in December, I would take a group, and I probably had 10 coaches with me that were students at Tyler Junior College, Tennis Tech. And I said, Vic, we're here. I said, we're more than happy to help you with the clinic. He said, no, I just want to do it by myself because it's a holiday clinic. I want to have them have the feeling that it's from me. So I said, do you mind if we just sit up here on the deck? And so we sat on the deck at the Vic Braden Tennis College, Cote de Casa, and watched Vic. And, he was the whole method. He didn't break it down into parts, but he would just go from one person to the next, one person to the next. And it was just amazing how he had people hitting the ball by the end of that session. But it's just it. Yeah, I do think that ultimately it is the cash register, and I like to say that 12 5-minute lessons is better than one 60-minute lesson, but it doesn't quite work that way. But I do think that if everybody gave back, I think that we point fingers, and I think the USTA, they take a lot of hits. I mean, our governing body of tennis, it's like I think the Americans, we need to come together and think about how all the good in America instead of all the bad, the left versus the right, and maybe both sides being too extreme. And tennis has its political side as well. But I think to have people work together and break the cliques with, and you think about community service and young people. I'm asked all the time to, write out a letter that the child has done all this community service when they really haven't. But I think that needs to be built into programs where it's not what's in it for me. What do I get out of this?
Yeah. And I want to say, too, there's a precedent in just about every other sport, especially team sports. I mean, I didn't have a coach who was a paid coach until high school. I mean, I volunteer baseball coaches, basketball coaches, soccer coaches. For some reason, tennis seems to escape that. And a lot of that is due to there's not enough programming knowledge out there. But for some reason, there's all these sports where everyone volunteers and gets out there and helps out. But with tennis, it tends to be $100 an hour. It's a little bit tougher.
The word measured, anything that can be measured can be improved. I certainly listen to a lot of tennis podcasts. I listen to some hockey podcasts. I guess Jockocracy 101. One of my sons listens to a lot of, bless his soul, he listens to a lot of political podcasts. But it seems to me when you listen to all these tennis podcasts, it's so subjective. No one's ever using any numbers. But I think if there was avenues on how to measure how you're giving back, if that's where we could work together, like say the PTR and the USPTA are obviously older, and I mean one's 1927, the USPTA, the PTR 1977. They're very established, and they have avenues where people could give back, or there's in ways for that to be measured, just like community service. You have to. I know when I was a kid in prep school, we had a Big Brother program, and you were either there or you weren't there to donate your time to help some little kid with math.
Yeah, in corporate America, that's a big deal right now. Is everyone wants to know, environmental sustainability, governance, but it's showing up on financial statements, and there's question marks about how do you measure it, just like you're asking. And from a time perspective, that's like the number one way you can look at it. Is if I'm on the court, say 40 hours a week, what can I get back? An hour of that, 2 hours of that, whatever it may be. But yeah, it's everyone wants to highlight what they're doing out in the world, but how to measure it is kind of a big question mark.
I think a big problem with competitive juniors is they get too much attention. So if they had to show up and help some beginners, I think that would help them tenfold. But it has to be organized. But I think in America right now, in junior tennis, it's very difficult to run a program. I always say that the individuals become bigger than the program. So we're going to take a group to the track, we're going to take a group to the beach, and people say, well, I'm not going to that session. Instead of, no, it's a program. And I do think that it even comes down to one's, compensation on the side of the pro, but also then to how you, a junior, instead of them paying per time, this is what I pay per, so they pay for the session. Then you just show up. Well, no, you paid for the session. Well, whether you decide to not do the parking lot workout or not, the sunrise workout. So then too much, I think they can pick and choose.
Yeah. I personally haven't experienced that from my position, but I can understand. I'm friends with the coach of one of the towns that the high school coach of one of the towns that I had taught the recreation for, and they had a really good junior come in, and for him it was so exciting. He's like, it sets your lineup, it makes things easier, it does whatever. So I can understand why you would be more willing to make those concessions, but at the same time, how much are you, growing that individual person if you're making those concessions or doing whatever. But yeah, it's about, I can see the troublesome parts of that. If you're trying to run a program, establish a program, you kind of want an all-in, bought-in experience.
Well, I met you in Memphis. And one thing that we didn't do in Memphis, and I think it's very important to have reflective thought, I certainly considered it. It was like, well, we need to bring in portable basketball because that's the sport in Memphis is basketball. And a story that's close to my heart is I was helping Vic Braden in Detroit, and nearby is his hometown, Monroe, Michigan. So we're doing this. I was just helping out. So he's speaking at 9 a.m, and then he's speaking again later that afternoon, and then the next day. So we made these trips to Monroe, Michigan. And so the very first time we drive into Monroe, and Vic says, Steve, pull over. So we pull over, and we get out, and the tennis courts are no longer there. But it was a surreal moment. He says, this is where it all started for me. And that's where Lawrence Alto, young Vic Braden, these tennis balls are going over the fence, and he thinks the tennis balls are lost, and he thinks he's found gold, and he's put the balls in his pocket, and he's going to run home. And Lawrence says, hey, kid, get over here. And the famous story is he was teasing him. He said, I tell you what, you can give those balls back and come over here and learn how to play tennis, or you're going to go to jail for stealing those tennis balls. So Vic, great storyteller, great comedian, said, well, I chose not to go to jail. And for all of us that have been touched by Vic Braden's life, who came from Lawrence, Alzo on a public court saying, hey, kids, come over here. Don't steal those balls. Bring those balls back. I'll teach you for free or you can go to jail. And that's how Vic Braden got started in tennis.
That's good.
Amazing story. But you mentioned in your report here, Julian Krinsky, I think this should happen. What are your thoughts? I mean, you have two young boys, it would be right up their alley. They go to a tennis facility. It's almost trickery. Like, no, initially we're going to teach you to run. We're going to teach you to throw, catch. We'll teach you to dribble, basketball forwards, backwards, one foot, the other foot. But we're just going to teach you tennis technique because we just know it's instruction, destruction. Once we say ready, play, it's just ugly. Tennis kids, it's just so difficult. So to tease them, my whole point is that, you go to an indoor tennis club and there's 7,200 square feet. And I know this is done in Russia with gymnastics, is they come to the court and they're learning all these different sports, but it's at a tennis center. Right? Why don't you touch upon multiple sports being interfaced into tennis?
Yes. Just about every single guest that you've had on has stressed the importance of playing multiple sports growing up. And it is so important. And I will, full credit to the PTR in their programming as well. They were very anti-focused sports at a young age. They, throughout their sort of description of the sort of growth patterns, different ages and stuff like that, they were really focusing on being on the court and doing drills that weren't necessarily tennis related. It was footwork, movement, balance, agility, controlling the body, things of that nature. And so I grew up multiple sports. Like I said, anything we could play in the backyard, we're playing. I hope I'm not the last of the neighborhood generation, but we had the friends of the neighborhood. Everyone would get together, and it would be baseball, wiffle ball, football, soccer, basketball in the driveway. My parents got me into skiing. They had a Friday after school skiing program. Anything and everything. And I think is it Cole Reeves who runs the facility or teaches the facility near the Walmart headquarters?
Yeah, he's in Arkansas. Yeah, great tennis, great technician. Yeah, he's there. The facility the facility's closed right now. It's a beautiful facility. I went there to visit, and they're knocking it down and building another one. But yeah, go ahead.
Nice.
What are you going to say about Cole?
Well, Cole had made a comment about, he has to explain to the parents why the kids are, trapping a ball against the ground and sort of rolling it in a straight line. And he mentioned, the kids don't have the spatial awareness. I'm just trying to develop a little bit of hand-to-eye coordination at that point. It's not about hitting the ball at this age. It's about making them an athlete. If I toss the ball to him, I think he said it would hit him in the face. They wouldn't have any idea. And that's where I love the idea of just just get the kids out, let them learn how to dribble, let them learn how to move their feet. Look at relay games and ways to incorporate competition without it having to deal with the success of the ball going over the net. But there's so much to learn and grow athletically. That if I was taking on juniors, I think there has to be a very frank conversation with the parents up front that in order to be a better tennis player, we're going to need to focus on multiple or variety of sports that work on footwork and hand-to-eye coordination and body balance and pretty much everything. And one of the ways that I think that's fantastic way to do it is when Julian Krinsky was on, he was mentioning the camps had all different sports. It wasn't just tennis. But a multiple sport camp summertime, that is awesome. I'm looking into one for my kids over the next couple of years that's in New Hampshire. It's on Sandy Island on Winnipesaukee. And my family, my in-laws all went there growing up. And they said there's a 5K race on the Sunday. There's canoeing, kayaking, and swimming. Then they have a tennis tournament, a softball tournament, a dodgeball tournament. The entire week. It's a 1 week thing. You're living in cabins. And then every day you're just joining up, write your name on the sign up list and participating in all these different sports. And that just sounds like a blast to me to begin with. But in terms of developing an athlete, developing a tennis player, that's the way to go. It's just get these kids exposed to as much as possible, and get them learning all these different motions from all these various sports.
Yeah, so you made so many comments to come back on a couple. Cole Reeves, don't judge the unfinished product is something that we've been telling people for a long time. Like parents, just stick around, give us a chance. It's not going to be instant tennis. And if you go really, really slow, the student has to be patient, but so does the parent. Ultimate Frisbee lightning ball that's on our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. I know you have in your notes. We definitely need to do that. Your report that we need to, in many ways, improve the course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. One thing comes to my mind is a story. Brian Hanna. Brian. He had the toothpick and the cowboy boots and the blue jeans, and I ended up getting along really well with Brian. But he was just at that phase, like we all were at one point or another. He was a little too cool for school, and so I'm on the board designing a lab for 80 community people, 80 people coming out in the evening. And he raises his hand and says, "How would you do this without us?" And I looked at him, and he was just asking it to be too cool for school. So I just started racing the board. And I said, "Tonight I will do it without you, and I will do it better." And I would have to say I wasn't being cocky. At that point, I could do it better. I mean, they were student teachers, and I just needed a whistle. And I had all of them. So at that time, the program was growing. Maybe there was, 40 people in the program. So I had 40 students on the bleachers watching me teach a community clinic with 80 on. But I did, instead of spreading out to 12 courts, I just kept them on the 8 courts that were right there in earshot. But that just comes down to putting all the different ideas together. That's where I really respect you, having listened to all these podcasts. And it is a matter of putting all these ideas together, and organization is the key word. I think you're right on that we need to have a recap. Hopefully this podcast has served to at least touch upon that, and we can come back to it. I have a question for you, though. As a late starter to tennis, Bud Collins, late Bud Collins, 2 types of players, those who played Wimbledon and those who didn't. So obviously, like me, you didn't play Wimbledon, so you're not a big-time player, and you're teaching part-time. What battles do you face with the credibility side in Boston? Are there some former college players that they just have instant credibility? Do you face that within your circles?
Yeah. So it's not. No. I mean, from the beginner side, I have had a few former college players that will show up in the intermediate group. They're more looking to get back into play. If from a credibility standpoint, for someone who's coming out of college, challenge them with the drill, get the point across with the drill, put them back in that environment where they can feel competitive, and then let them play. I feel like it's, for the beginner side, you will get people who are frustrating. They maybe don't want to change a stroke, or they're struggling to understand the concept of it. For someone like that, you almost have to let the frustration fester for a minute, and then be like, "Hey, I think we can work on that. I think if we kind of change this, maybe we can get the ball to go a little higher over the net," something to that effect. But with college players coming in, you have to drill it. You have to make it worth their while. You have to get them out there practicing something that is advanced as they are. And, maybe it's a footwork drill moving through the ball. Maybe you are parsing out sort of approach forehand and having a contact point far out and trying to hit the ball at its peak versus, what if you're being backed up and you're hitting a baseline, trying to get yourself back in a position from a defensive position. And that's, I found people respond really well to that. The other thing is sort of don't be afraid to, if people are really sort of technically more proficient than others, is pull them aside every now and again and tell them, you're good here. This is where you can work on, but get into more of the minutia of maybe what's plaguing them or what they could be better at. I haven't had an issue where someone comes in and blows me off the court. I'm thankfully still a little bit athletic. So when we're playing out points or giving examples, stuff like that, I haven't met my match in that way yet.
What about the community? Not without getting yourself in trouble. Again, the credibility side. We always say that credibility means you're believable. Credibility doesn't mean you're truthful. How about the former college players? Or maybe touring pros that are in the greater Boston area. Do you see anything and everything when it comes to witchcraft as far as people learning how to hit tennis balls?
Yes. I dealt with it last week a little bit. It was a little bit frustrating, and I mean, these would be considered lifetime coaches. You'll just hear something, or they'll try to discredit something. And knowing the science behind it, it's very easy for me to explain. The biggest issue I had was, literally just last week, and the question came up on forehand volley. And the argument or the disagreement was that the forehand volley's momentum source should be stepping in and through the ball. And that was my argument. At contact points, so stepping in and through the ball through contact points so that your head doesn't go down, so the racket doesn't go down. And the response I got was, no, I think they actually said that's witchcraft taught by old school coaches. I was like, oh my God. I don't want to call out any particular coach, but because I was in a situation where I'm hoping to get certified, I just closed my mouth. I had to sit back and listen to it. And the example given was was a video of Kara Black, as a junior hitting reflex volleys, 4 or 5 feet from the net. And I was like, that's not what we're talking about here. That was frustrating. That was the most frustrating situation I've ever been in. I remember checking my heart rate after I stopped speaking, and I had a little bit of spike, and I just said to myself, you know what? Let's get through this. Let's fight the ignorance with the next person, that type of deal. But for the most part, Steve, out on the courts, no. You'll have people say something like, oh, this is uncomfortable or it's unnatural. And a lot of times you have to explain that that's exactly what it is. When I make that switch from a 3 grip to a 2 grip, from the Eastern to the Continental for the serve, it's absolutely uncomfortable to everybody who starts out. But you demonstrate where the contact point is and which way your racket's facing. You talk about hitting up on the ball versus pulling down on the ball, and it clicks. Most people realize exactly what you're doing if you can show them exactly what you're trying to teach them.
Well, a beginner is a beginner. I know at one point the USTA had, it was in writing, not to use the term beginner, and I think that's unfortunate. There was a situation years ago where I was directing a junior college women's team, and someone else was serving as the head coach. The situation was the head coach could not go, and the Nationals were out in Arizona, and it was fantastic. The late Chet Murphy, along with his brother Bill, they long careers in tennis and written many books, and Chet had, I just jotted down some notes. I think there was a drag volley, a snap volley, certainly a reflex volley, a pull volley, cup the ball, touch the ball. And he was right in this whole, his dissertation, his explanation of how to hit all these different volleys. But a beginner is a beginner. Let's just teach you how to hit the beginning volley. I think that many times in tennis, what we do is we skip too many chapters. And again, talking to Ed Weiss this past week, he sent me some video of a high school player who's got to go back to the drawing board, and he volunteers his time to coach high school tennis. And, the kid, basically, we would classify the kid as a redo. He's got to rebuild his game. And, it's just slow down and learn fundamentals. I think that applies in everything. It's just slow down and learn fundamentals, and not to skip the chapter and say, well, that's not how the pros. I mean, we're talking it could be 6-year-olds, 6th graders, or some adult who's been on the court for 6 minutes. and we don't need to really be talking to them about pro tennis.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little story about Ilya here, but when I was sort of struggling to put everything together, meeting with you the first time, I went home at night and, in the room, literally just looking in front of the mirror and going through the footwork and the motion without even a racket in hand. And we went out one night. Ilya took a couple of us out and showed us the pyramid in Memphis, and then to Rendezvous, the rib place. And as we were walking around the entire night, all he was doing was shadow swinging. In the middle of the Bass Pro Shops in the pyramid, he's just shadow swinging. And I said to myself, like, that's it. That's the only way I'm going to learn. This guy here is a professional tennis player, and here he is standing next to a clothing rack, and he is shadow swinging his volley. And so when I went out to teach, less than a month later, I knew I wasn't going to be able to play. I was not going to be able to convince people to be better tennis players by playing because I was not practiced at the form that I was trying to teach. So my wife, again, saint of a woman, I'm in my kitchen every night practicing serves and overheads without a racket in hand, just doing the weird motions, just in mid-conversation. But that's what it takes. It takes really slowing it down. It's to build up your game and to have the habits be the correct form. You just need to keep doing it. You need to find a way to keep doing it. I keep a junior racket by my desk when I'm working, and pretty much in the corporate world, 90% of the meetings that happen are not necessary. So I turn my camera off, listen to the meetings, and I am just swinging the junior racket and going through grip changes and stances and swings. And that's how I personally make it my habits, build my myelin, so that when I go out there these days, I can demonstrate, I can play against players and have the correct form and make it something that they can see visually. They can be successful with it, as opposed to making everything just be a very slow demo. But you got to start with the very slow demos to get there.
No, that's a great story. Late Johnny Carson, it was a golf swing, but towards the end of his career, he made it a tennis swing. It was a forehand. But after his monologue, he would shadow swing the forehand.
Yep.
Matt Clore and I have done a lot of things together. Really, I just think about when he met my son Connor, so it's 17 years ago. And I was in a setting, or we were in a setting where I could see him. He was the assistant coach at NC State, and the head coach. I mean, if they were in there for an hour, they were in there for 3 hours. And I'm coaching juniors, and he when he was asked a question, he would answer that question, but he shadow swung the whole time. For, the length of the meeting, he's just shadow swinging. We had George Goldoff on. I tell juniors, he was into the NBA playoffs, and showed him some things he needed to do. And I said, you could watch the entire basketball game tonight and shadow swing the entire time, which he did. But yeah, it's repetition, and get, how can we get people to hit more balls? That's the secret. Hit more balls, have more fun. But Steve, it's been great to have you on the podcast. Any closing comments? You want to just say one thing that we can go right on the bathroom wall?
Group dynamics. Keep on it. Get more people on a court together, and effective teaching. That's better coaching from group dynamics.
No, I really respect your passion, your commitment to the game, and I could just tell. And you were so humble, saying, "Hey, could you touch upon this in your podcast?" And I said, "Well, let's just move you to the front of the line and have you touch upon these points." But no, it's been great, and I'm sure our listeners have got quite a bit out of it. But last question: are you pulling for the Boston Bruins?
Bruins and Celtics. Celtics dropped the ball last night, but hopefully they both coming through. It'd be awesome to have historic seasons on both sides. Bruins having the best season ever, and Celtics with a first-year head coach potentially. We'll see what can happen.
With you're not really tuned into the basketball, but yeah, the Bruins. I mean, they had such a great season. It'd be like, is there any way they could lose? But that's why they play the game. But Steve, all the best to you, your family, and let's stay in touch, and really appreciate you helping us with the GreatBase.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
All right. Adios. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Another podcast in the books. Very dedicated individual. I really enjoyed not only talking to him today, but talking to him in the past, having a visit, but to read his report. And, he referenced so many people that he had listened to on the podcast. So knock on wood, I think the podcasts are helping some. Anyway, I will sign off. Thanks again for tuning in.